Okay, check. 1, 2. I think we should have sound now. We should be all good now. And let's make sure we've got sound before we keep going.
Yep, it's working.
Okay, good. Again, it's just one of those little settings. Guys, for those of you who are watching live, here's what we're going to do. Hang on a second here. Yeah, just for you guys that are watching live, you bear with me for just a second. We're gonna run that opening again in just a moment. Before we do though, since we're still not in our studio and we're running a remote setup, Summer, are you seeing any glitches or any problem with the video here?
No, I can see the website, and somebody in the chat says, Scott says, I can hear Summer.
Okay.
All right. Hopefully that means they can hear you as well.
Okay, as long as when we have me and you
hear you as well.
Okay, as long as okay, there we go. Yeah, I can hear me too, but wow, I am modulated and over the top. Let me pull that down just a tad. Okay. All right. Now then. Check 1, 2. There we go. I was over modulated quite a bit. That should be better. All right.
Scott says he can't hear Brad.
You should have me now. Over modulated quite a bit. That should be better. All right.
Scott says he can't hear Brad.
You should have me now. I over modulated quite a bit. That should be better.
We so crazy.
Scott says he can't hear Brad.
You should have me now. Did you repeat that, or was that my? Oh, man, what a mess. You should hear me now. Unbelievable, right? Unbelievable. Are we good now, folks? You there?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay. All right. Do you have my audio?
Do I have what?
My audio. Do you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay. All right. There's just problems here. I mean, after everything we worked through the other day, I'm getting the same signal from YouTube about stream. But as long as there's no,
your voice is just really soft, I think is what it is. Like your voice is quite soft.
All right, I can pop that up some.
Your voice is just really soft, I think is what it is. Like your voice is quite soft.
Okay, you turn your audio off there. Wow, this is crazy. Bear with us 1 second here, and then we're going to run our intro over again, and then I'll clip this off the front of the show once we go. I'm checking our internet speed and everything. We're getting that upload that we should have. Low latency, but YouTube is telling me that we're not putting out enough. Our bit rate's too low. Funny, because that's impossible. All right. Well, as long as it's not actually, hesitating or something, I'm going to ignore YouTube. All right. So I think, are we settled now? Appreciate that, Joe. Thank you for that help.
Joe and Scott, thank you in the chat.
Joe and Scott. Yeah, it's so funny because on the YouTube app, the YouTube desktop here, it's telling me that our bit rate is lower than the recommended bit rate. Just so if you don't know anything about that, I've got our bit rate set at 10,000 because that's the kind of setup we got now. We've got a 1 gig, we got a gigahertz connection here. YouTube's telling me that my current bit rate is below 3,000, which is, lower than they recommend. I have no idea what they're doing to us here. Don't know. But we're going to run that intro again here in just a second and make sure that when people watch this on replay, it's not quite so discombobulated. All right. Yeah, I just have to ignore YouTube. It's so distracting. Telling me that we've got not All right, I'm going to go back to the startup screen. You guys who are with us on the live stream, thank you for being here. Thank you for helping us. Thank you for being our co-producers. We're going to start that over so I can clip this silly section off the front, and the replay will be clean. All right. Mute up some, and we'll just start over, okay? Welcome, everybody, to Armor of Truth Live number 377. Everything is happening in South Africa right now. That's where, for a while, our attention was on the Middle East. Now it's on South Africa, and there are good reasons for that. Let me show you. Let me catch you up real quickly on what we've been doing here on our Substack for the past couple weeks, because this story is developing, and every day there is a new development, right? So over the past couple weeks, we've talked about Trump's tariffs, offering an argument as to why that could be an anti-globalist strategy. There's some other stuff that came to light after that. We may have adjusted that a bit, but we do have a show coming up soon about navigating the narratives. We're going to talk about that some tonight too, but we're going to talk about a little bit more about the false religion, the return to false religion that's happening in the country, in the West right now. We talked about Mahmoud Khalil and how that's a fabricated free speech crisis. That Trump is perfectly within his moral standing, perfectly within his constitutional authority and morally speaking. So we gave the biblical case for why deportation is right in certain cases. And then South Africa happened again. And that's where we are here. Over 67,000 persecuted South Africans. There we go. Have accepted, according to this story, Trump's offer to move to the United States. So let me bring you up to date on what this actually means. Now, South Africa is often referred to as the Second America. What we want to do in this show is tell you everything you need to know to bring you up the history, so you can understand when you hear what they're saying about the land and who the land belongs to and who the oppressors are in this case. So you'll have the facts. South Africa shares historical ties with the United States. Both nations fought the British for self-governance and freedom. But South Africa's downfall didn't happen by accident. It was the result of a calculated communist globalist infiltration. On February 7th, 2025, just 2 months ago, just under 2 months ago, President Donald Trump issued an executive order. And it was called, actually I have it right here. We can look at it right there. It was called Addressing Egregious Actions of the Republic of South Africa. This executive order vows to end U.S. taxpayer support for the communist regime in South Africa, who are currently, with this new expropriation act that Cyril Ramaphosa signed recently, to seize land.
You're going to want to back up a little bit so you're not in front of the screen. Just a little bit to the other side.
Okay. So, all right. I guess I'm hiding behind the thing there. Oh boy, guys, let me just put the papers down and talk to you for a minute here. If you only knew what was going on, what's been happening here over the past few months. There's no point in getting into all that right now, but it has been a test just to get things right. We're still not in our studio. We for all intents and purposes, we could be there today, but pray for us. We don't know what's going on. So I'll just start over with that again. South Africa is often referred to as the Second America. Both nations fought the British for self-governance, but South Africa's downfall didn't happen by accident. It was the result of a calculated communist globalist infiltration. Now, on February 7th of this year, Trump issued an executive order. And it's titled, as you can see there on your screen, Addressing Egregious Actions of the Republic of South Africa. And this executive order vows to end U.S. taxpayer support for the communist regime in South Africa, who have been, through this new expropriation act, right there, they say Ramaphosa should be charged with treason. But Ramaphosa signed an expropriation act, which means that the government can go and seize land, specifically of the white farmers there, known as the Boers. It's a Afrikaner word, Afrikaans term for farmer. And so with all of this happened, with the rise of a communist regime, the African National Congress in South Africa, we're going to also tell you the origins of that party, or at least the since the 1990s, who is actually influencing and controlling that party. The executive order is going to basically, as we see now in the news today, they want to cut ties with the South African government. The White House wants to cut ties with this communist regime, and that's because of racist laws, 142 race-based laws on the books right now. They target minorities, and in this case, minorities there in South Africa would be the Afrikaners, the white farmers, and what are known as coloreds, they call them there. That would be someone who is in the United States, we would call someone of mixed race. But basically, they've been terrorizing the Afrikaner farmers. So what's unfolding in South Africa is really the goal of the Davos elites. And they absolutely support what you see happening in South Africa right now. That means they support these communist forces who will not stop their cold, calculated violence until we are all living in a post-Western, post-Christian world. That's what they want. The globalists run this operation in every nation. It just looks a little different depending on where you live and what traumas they feel like they can exploit in your particular people group. Even with Donald Trump as president, America and most of the world is still in the midst, I will just break it down and call it a communist revolution, because ultimately that is the goal. And we want to talk to you tonight a little bit more about why that is the case and explain to you why that is. While communist in the 19th century sense might not be precisely accurate, it is still collectivism nonetheless. And we'll break that down for you later. Investigative journalist Alex Newman explains it this way. Most Americans know very little about what's going on in South Africa, but let's just go ahead and show you some of these clips. Let's jump into this piece right here. Summer, do you want to introduce us a little bit to what we've got here? And you might be able to just direct me through what we have here, because since you've been following this story so closely. I'm in the article now, starting with the 67,000 persecuted South Africans say yes to Trump's offer. And that's because Trump recently extended an offer, a refugee resettlement offer to, it didn't say white farmers. It said those people in South Africa who are being persecuted right now, being the targets of the Expropriation Act, in other words. And this is what it is. As of March 24th, 2025, the PRM Refugee Resettlement Program, which is a humanitarian initiative administered by the U.S. Department of State's Bureau of Population, Refugees, and Migration, is in effect offering safe resettlement in the United States for South Africans who have experienced egregious private property seizures and race-based violence under the World Economic Forum captured ultra-racist South African regime. And this is one of the tweets recently that kind of explains it all. Comes from Marco Rubio himself. Secretary of State Marco Rubio. Kill the Boer, which is, we'll show you this chant in just a moment, is a chant that incites violence. South Africa's leaders and politicians must take action to protect Afrikaners and other disfavored minorities. The United States is proud to offer those individuals who qualify for admission to our nation amid the continued horrible threat of violence. So this is more of the background here. We just told you about the executive order that Trump signed in February. It was in response to, again, the Expropriation Act, which permits the government to seize agricultural property from ethnic minority Afrikaners. That means white people. And the big point here is without compensation. Take it from them. Now, I'll just remind you before we go any farther here. This is exactly what occurred in the Soviet Union when the Bolsheviks overthrew the Tsar. The first thing they did was to disarm the people, and then they turned the people on the kulaks. Who were the kulaks? The kulaks were the property-owning farmers. They were the farmers. They're the ones who produced the food. They weren't wealthy by standards that we would think of today. Much like the Afrikaners, they just owned their land, and they produced food for the nation, food and other goods for the nation. So this is where we sit. This gives us a little bit of a setup for what's going on right now. Now I want to ask Summer to sort of lead us through which article do you believe we should begin with, and how should we tell this story? And then I'll add in, because I've got some background information. We're going to talk about a little bit too about why do these people feel like that it's the right thing to do to call for violence against a certain ethnicity. There is a precedent for this. There is a very strong support for this in the world, and I'll explain to you exactly why that is and why they think it's just in just a bit.
Well, one of the things that's developed over the last few days is the article that we put out about the way that they're twisting the statistics about the land ownership.
Let's do land. Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, that's been quite deceptive. So
is that,
you'll hear claims out there from the New York Times and different people saying 80% or 72% is owned by white South Africans. And so with this particular article that we put out on Substack, it's really good because it just goes point by point and sort of illustrates. Brad can, let's do that. Let's go through that one.
Let's explain to the people here exactly what you may hear. Do we have any clips that kind of maybe set this up, or are they in the article? Probably in the article.
Yes, if you go down keep scrolling down in that article, the Colonel has that video where he speaks a little bit about it. The way that the statistics are being twisted around there, it is.
Okay.
So,
should we play a little bit of that one?
Yeah.
This is a maize field from last year, folks. Land, an emotive issue. something people will fight over, people willing to give up their lives over. An emotive issue, something that's of great importance now in South Africa, as the ANC has botched the land reform program for 31 years. Here in central Pennsylvania, more and more farmland is being turned over to residential and commercial use. We're seeing farms disappear left and right. Kind of a sad situation. But land is what a lot of people fight over. But the vast majority of human beings own no land whatsoever.
How about that, James?
Hey folks, welcome back. This is Chris in central Pennsylvania. It's disheartening to see the lies and
Okay, I'll jump ahead just a bit here, because what he's going to say here, I'll catch you up here. He's going to talk about the fact that it's hard to know exactly what these numbers are, who owns how much land, and because the last time they did an accounting of this was a big land audit in South Africa that was done in 2017. So we're looking at 7 years now. So all the data from that, as far regarding the Boers, the ones they want, the ones they want to kill, will be less. They'll even be less than what they are now. So, go ahead, Sam.
I was just going to say that since 7 years has passed, obviously a lot can change, but this is the most valid data that's available out there. And so basically, like a lot of, because of what's been happening with South African farmers and stuff, there's actually even the statistics would reflect that there's way less farmers, white farmers out there to begin with, as being landowners as well. So just keeping that in mind.
Okay, yeah, we'll let him set this up for you, and then we'll show you some of these statistics. We like this guy. This is Colonel Chris. What's his name, son? Colonel Chris Wyatt, former Navy colonel, I believe it is. So he's retired. He's a retired Navy colonel, I should say. And
he's good.
He spent a lot of time in the area. He knows the people of the area. He knows the people of South Africa very well. So so he's a good source if you want to keep up with him every day on this story.
Ronnie Lamola simply outright tell fairy tales, or in his case, lie. He claimed that whites owned 80% of the land in South Africa. That's fiction, no matter how you look at it. It all stems from the fact that in 2017, land that was designated as agricultural by the South African government, white South Africans owned 72% of that land. But let's roll back the numbers here. South Africa's total surface area is 114 million hectares. 21% of that is owned by the government of South Africa in 2017. So 21%, making the second largest single by group landowner in the country. If we're using groups such as whites, coloreds, Indians, black South Africans, but as a group, the government of South Africa owned 21% of all the land, the surface area of South Africa. Now, 93 million hectares was in private ownership, either through trust or businesses or individual ownership in 2017. Of the 93 million hectares, 36 million of that was classified as agricultural holdings. Now that includes macadamia nut farms, people growing wheat, dairy farms, but also things in the Karoo that have thousands of hectares that you need just to have sheep to graze because the quality of the soil is so poor and the vegetation is sparse. So 36 million hectares of the 114 million are agricultural. Not all are well watered, just they're designated as agricultural because only 13% of the land is actually arable. It's a far smaller percentage. But 36 million hectares of agricultural land. White South Africans, according to the definition, who was white in 2017 by the government, owned 26 million hectares of the agricultural land. So that's where the 72% comes from. But bear in mind, that's 2017. A lot has changed since then. Land has changed hand. The government has bought more hectares of land, willing buyer, willing seller basis. And a lot of people have exited the commercial farming business. The number of commercial farmers who are white in South Africa has declined to somewhere between 28 and 32,000 from a total of 72,000 commercial farmers back in 1994. Quite a drop. So there are fewer and fewer white South Africans on commercial farms around the country. So white commercial farmers own 72% of the agricultural holdings. But that represents just 29% of the surface area of the country, 29%. Now, you take that and you realize that represents just 29% of the privately held land. So just under 1/3 of the land that's in private hands was owned by whites, who make up about 8 to 9% of the population. So overrepresented for sure as far as land ownership, but not the lies that Ronnie Lamola is telling you. And if you look at the total surface area of South Africa, it goes from 29 to 23%. So white South Africans in 2017 owned 23% of the surface area of South Africa. Now, there are other whites who own land, residential, but that doesn't add up to much in the way of things. So this is the lie that's perpetrated to spread racial hatred in South Africa and divide South Africans. Now, the problem here is that politicians in South Africa don't want to deal with facts. Ronnie Lamola, the media, and many others, including the New York Times and publications around the world, consistently lie, either because they're lazy or they're dishonest. It's not difficult to find this information. All you have to do is look at the 2017 land audit, and you can find all the facts. Everything's there. You don't have to believe me, ladies and gentlemen. Check the receipts. Go to the 2017 land audit, which is freely available for download from the government of South Africa. Do a Google search. You can download it, look through it, and find this information. So why is this narrative pushed? Well, it's pushed to retain votes for the ruling party. And of course, the media in South Africa in cahoots with the ruling party. So they push this narrative. Foreign media are lazy or dishonest to push a narrative, a racially tinged narrative. For whatever reason, people hate white South Africans in international media. Don't know why. The majority of white South Africans in South Africa were born after apartheid and have nothing to do with it. They've lived only under the African National Congress in their entire existence. So it's time for people to start telling the truth about land in South Africa. Yes, white South Africans own a disproportionate share. Yes, land was taken from people illegitimately, immorally, but legally during the apartheid era, and even before that, starting with the Native Lands Act of 1913 going forward. But an agreement was reached at the Convention for Democratic South Africa, the CODESA convention that took place in the early 1990s. The agreement was that land claims would only go back to 1910 when the Union of South Africa was formed. Now we're seeing people reneging on that agreement, which is one of the main reasons that apartheid ended, is an agreement was reached on not claiming land before that date, because there was no South Africa before 1910. You had a Zulu kingdom, you had other kingdoms, you had the Boer republics, the Free State and the Transvaal, you had the Cape Colony from Britain and the Natal Colony. So it was an amalgamation of all these things brought together after the Anglo-Boer War, which led to the creation of the Republic of South Africa, which didn't exist before that. So 1910 was a reasonable date to go with. But people claiming land from 1658 and 1787, these are things lost in the sands of time. It's illegitimate. And nobody alive today has any legitimate claim to any of those lands. It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. But the bottom line with land in South Africa is that it's an emotive issue. And therefore, people benefit by lying and misleading. The truth of the matter is this. White South Africans own more land disproportionately than other ethnic groups in South Africa. But we're only talking about a very small number of people. The total number of white landowners in 2017 in the entire country at that time of, 58 million people was around that time, 58 million South Africans, only 95,000 white South Africans owned any land. There are 4.8 million white South Africans, so almost all white South Africans don't own land. To call whites landowners and say they stole the land is dishonest, disingenuous, and it's simply quite nasty race hustling. It needs to stop. The government has had a policy in place which they failed to use properly.
Okay, son. There's a setup. So the narrative that you're going to hear is that I was talking to Scott Christ in the chat there. I'm working on that sound as we speak. So why don't you let's look at our article now and what you've written and what you've shown here about this particular issue. If I can figure out how to get to it, there we go. Now the title of this article is "Being Right Wrongly: How South African Land Stats Are Twisted into Propaganda," calling out publications, for instance, like the New York Times, because the reason someone has said this is because the New York Times reported just early this week, I believe it was, maybe it was Monday, they reported just the opposite of what Colonel Chris was saying here. It's that they're reporting, of course, that you see that the whites own the majority of the land. Go ahead and take it over, son.
Yeah, so we've talked about it before with, introducing you to what James Lindsay first sort of coined telling the truth falsely and being right wrongly. And so this is an instance of that in application, because the tactic that, for example, the New York Times has used, or some people that have parroted it on Twitter, where it's 80% is owned by white people. I mean, obviously, so this is one of these cases where there's a tactic in modern media that's as dangerous as outright lying. It's called telling the truth falsely. And we've written about it before, as I've just said. And it happens when a technically correct fact is ripped from its context. So, maybe somebody wanted to round up and say it was 80% to be a little bit more inflammatory, or maybe they were just quoting, that 72% of white, or, that whites own 72% of the land. It's taking a fact, but it's ripping it out of its context. And obviously that has the effect of inflating things emotionally. And it's done this to create confusion and, of course, have this ideological narrative that gets hoisted up. So it's stoking the division and the resentment. And, unfortunately, in the world that we're living in, there are the people that still listen to that establishment media, and they get captured by it. And then they'll think that anything that we have to say is just completely lies and not true. And they won't go in somehow and take a look at what the information is saying. And then, of course, if you've got all of these media outlets from the establishment pushing that other narrative, then you're thinking, well, they've fact checked it. So what it reveals is that there's a very real effort to demonize the white farmers and in South Africa, and actually that much of what we've learned about Afrikaners has been simply wrong, especially when we think about the early settlers there, because when they arrived to South Africa, it was like they didn't even come across any other peoples. They were like there alone on the land for almost a century and really not encountering any other peoples at all on the continent. And they were actually Calvinist Christians. So it just goes to show, like with this internet age that we're in and how we are still able to glean access to this other historical information. It's not a revisionist history. This is known factual evidence. Like Alex Newman from Liberty Sentinel has done a lot of work on just saying, hey, actually, this is the real history. And what we can see is a lot of parallels between what's happened in South Africa and what's happened in America, right? Like there's been a lot of things that have been grossly exaggerated to inflame tensions and a lot of stuff that's just outright fairy tales, as an exercise like this that we've tried to demonstrate for you here in this article, laboriously point by point, to hopefully make that imprint in your mind on how to think critically about this.
Okay, let's see. Let's go over here. I'll give let me give a brief history of South Africa here, just from Alex Newman. South Africa, he says, was once a thriving Western Christian country with an advanced industrial economy. They developed their own nuclear power. They had high living standards and more. Again, it's often referred to as the second United States, second America. It all began when the Dutch arrived at what would later become Cape Town in 1652. All right. They arrived in 1652. Now, most of the people, most of those who are that you hear explaining that this land needs to be returned to the people that it belongs to, and all, well, most of those people migrated into this area as well. All right. One group that was there were the Zulus, and the Zulus fought with the Afrikaners, the Dutch, against the British when they came through. But I'll give you a little more background here. Remember, 1652 is when they arrived there. And when they arrived, the region was virtually uninhabited, as Summer just told you, except for small bands of non-black nomadic people known as the Khoi and the San, many of whom were wiped out along with many Europeans in an epidemic. So that was the first big problem that wiped out a lot of people there in South Africa. It was sickness. Now, the non-British whites, known today as Afrikaners, meaning basically Dutch, French, German. The French were known as the Huguenots. They were all fleeing religious tyranny from the Roman Catholic Church in Europe. So these are what we call today the Afrikaners. They never met any black Africans, until after, as Summer just said, until they had been there for over 100 years. And that was deep in the interior of the continent, as various black tribes migrated southward into northwest South Africa, and descendants of Europeans moved north. Then they encountered each other. You heard that, didn't you? Migration, both ways. The world's first heart transplant was performed by an Afrikaner doctor at a South African hospital. The Afrikaners had prosperous first world economy, comparable with Europe or the United States, and aside from some oppressive race-based laws that were in the process of being dismantled, South African authorities had a better human rights record than probably any government on the African continent at that time. In fact, under apartheid, which translates to separate development, basically is what the word means. Under apartheid, illegal immigrants from across the African continent were literally flooding into South Africa by the millions to try to get a piece of the pie amid the emergence of a thriving black middle class. So this is the truth about the region, right?
Right. And I just wanted to mention, I was just going to say that the apartheid policy of separate development was intended to mirror the European model of ethnic nation states and provide self-governance to tribal, like traditional tribal homelands. So this, in the same way that you've got different nations in Europe that are different tribes that have very different cultures, you know, they wanted to, that was what they were thinking. And the Zulu nation was in support of this model. And because like it was like the Zulu, at one point it was the Zulus and the Afrikaners that were trying to hold off communism. The Zulu nation has actually suffered quite a bit for this. So again, just to reiterate that the apartheid policy of separate development was intended to mirror the European model of ethnic nation states, so that they would be involved in self-governance.
Yeah, that's what Alex writes here. He says the powerful Zulu nation, for example, under the leadership of Chiefs Mangosuthu Buthelezi and the Inkatha Freedom Party, fought long and hard alongside South African whites and other blacks to maintain its own independent homeland known as KwaZulu. For that, Zulus were viciously attacked, tortured, and slaughtered by the SACP-controlled ANC. In other words, viciously attacked, tortured, and slaughtered by the what is today known as the African National Congress. These guys that you see singing "Kill the Boer," that's the ANC. That's Cyril Ramaphosa. He's the president of South Africa right now. He's also the president of the ANC, of the African National Congress. All right, so and this has been ignored. This history, if you hear someone explain this history to you, someone who's lived there and knows it very well, you would think they were making it all up. But the problem is the narrative we've been told, that we've been sold, is a made up one. But of course, we have to disclaimer here, all right, because there were certainly problems under apartheid, and there were plenty of oppressive race-based laws during that time, including bans on interracial marriage and a requirement that blacks carry a passbook when traveling outside their homeland. Despite those policies, most of which were in the process of being dismantled long before the African National Congress came to power, South Africa was an oasis of prosperity and liberty, relatively speaking. All around, it was a continent that was drenched in blood from constant war, tyranny, and genocide and other horrors after the hasty, poorly thought out withdrawal of colonial powers amid Soviet expansionism. Millions of black Africans flooded into apartheid South Africa for jobs, peace, security, and prosperity. There were also countless possibilities for rectifying the real injustices in South Africa that didn't involve handing power to the communists, the communist terrorists known as the African National Congress, the ANC. But for the Soviet Union, the United Nations, and the Western establishment, very much including powerful figures such as David Rockefeller, the Rothschilds figure into this too, and organizations such as the Council on Foreign Relations, only democracy with the ANC and the SACP in charge was acceptable. And so whites were convinced to surrender power to the revolutionists in the 1992 election, culminating in the presidency being awarded to a communist terrorist by 1994. And that is, Summer? Nelson Mandela.
Nelson Mandela.
Mandibi, they called him. So,
and you've got Ramaphosa, who was sent off to be trained up for the Young Global Leaders program in 1994. Right. And you've got Mandela handshaking with Klaus Schwab. So you can actually see that it's like they got handed over to Mandela, who we thought in the West, like, oh, that's he won a Nobel Peace Prize. He was great, but actually, no, the country was, the front was that the country was being handed over to really this communist regime, but then the hidden hand behind it all was actually the technocrats, was actually Klaus Schwab and Klaus Schwab's wife. I mean, we've written a paper about this too. We've written an article about this as well. That one right there, Mandela, Ramaphosa, and Schwab. Yeah. And, so this land in South Africa, actually, it's been really, it's not only been captured by the communist forces, but in this article, you'll see it goes all the way back to Rhodes, Cecil Rhodes, and Rothschild, long before Mandela and Ramaphosa of South Africa. The Rothschilds were there, and doing their diamond business and wanting, but there was they wanted the resources, and they wanted to basically rape and pillage the land and all of that, of course, and they did a lot of that, but they also very much didn't want to have a nation that was based on Christianity and Christian values. They didn't want to have that flourishing. So of course they had to come in and try to subvert that. And so there's just this really intense history that a lot of people didn't realize was going on about South Africa that's really quite fascinating, and definitely draws a lot of parallels about, just the beginnings of, just that the Christian settlers were fleeing and they wanted to set up a country based on Christian values and the gospel, and then how that's been subverted and captured. And then, this front for this liberation that was supposedly happening. And you even see George Soros, coming in the 70s, running his programs, all of the same kind of stuff from George Soros in Cape Town in South Africa, starting in the 70s, and also particularly in the 90s too. So running this program, and the program that they have over there, which is BEE, Black Empowerment, Economic Empowerment, is a lot like DEI here. So it's just, we've been telling you guys all along that they use the same tactics throughout the world, but they just sort of tweak it depending on the ways that they can, take advantage of the grievances that might exist, and the ways that they can inflame those grievances and create that division that they really need to deconstruct all of these countries from within. So the formula looks a little bit different in every country, but there's no doubt that their handprints, their fingerprints are all over it.
Well, this is, I wanted you to explain, who is this gentleman here with Mandela?
Schwab.
All right. Let everybody know just exactly how it is.
Klaus Schwab.
Let everybody know is this the article where we talk about this? Yeah, this is the Fari Hassan piece. Now, Summer has done a lot of work to put this piece together for you. So I want to encourage all of you who are watching. This is, we'll make sure that you get these links in the description under the video. You need to check this article out. This is an excellent piece. Mandela.
Alex Newman even liked this article. Woohoo!
Yeah, and Alex has written extensively on South Africa and the topics that we discuss here. So it's about the hidden hand in South Africa's so-called liberation. The word liberation is thrown out there for you as to distract you, because it's not liberation. So you need to go read this. So we won't spend the whole video explaining it to you, because it's all right here for you. Right? The year, basically 1994 is the year that you need to know about. This is before that in 1990. Mandela had been in prison for 27 years, thrown in prison by the party in control at the time. And when you see who he is and his wife as well, and what they were up to after they got out of prison, it helps you understand a little bit about why he was in there in the first place. But when he was released, he almost immediately took control of the African National Congress. This is when the communist tendencies, or this is when it became radical. When Mandela was let out of. Do you want to cover this section here, Summer, or do you want me to?
Well, no, it's okay.
Okay.
You're better at working through the points. That's okay.
So yeah, in 90, Mandela was let out of prison. Okay, and just by a year later, he had assumed leadership over the African National Congress. Remember, again, this is the group who was attacking the white farmers then, and it's not just white farmers. It's other blacks. It's other what they call coloreds. They don't necessarily discriminate too much when it comes to violence. They are themselves. They are for themselves. So when Mandela got to the head of the ANC just a year after coming out of jail, that caught the eye of one Klaus Martin Schwab, founder and chief villain of the World Economic Forum. So in 1992, Schwab invited Mandela to Davos, of course, to hobnob with the nosy nobility, right? And funny enough, 2 years after that, a little bit less than 2 years after that, Nelson Mandela would become president of South Africa. That's symbolic, right? This is a symbolic moment in time. What it was Mandela's initiation into the globalist inner circle. They liked what they saw in this guy, right? And it also signaled the beginning of South Africa's alignment with globalist technocratic vampires. So they really just jumped out of the frying pan and into the fire. Celebrated in the media as a historic moment, Schwab's infiltration and influence from the shadows was a dark portent of South Africa's capture under the carefully manufactured illusion of liberation. And it was the same year, 1994, when Cyril Ramaphosa, the man who is the president today, was inducted into the World Economic Forum's Young Global Leaders Program. Not a coincidence, right? A calculated move to groom this guy so that the Davos elites could maintain control over South Africa, and they have held that control right up to the present time. Here you can see some more photos of Mandela and Schwab. Could it get any more obvious there? Back then, I don't think maybe the world was, I'm sure some people were, but not as much today, aware of just who Schwab is and what all this, what an alliance with Schwab actually means. Now, you want to check this article out too, because Summer has gone in the background, Klaus Schwab's wife, her involvement, which is funny because even in Mandela's case, right, Summer, in Mandela's case, it was also Mandela's wife turned out to be perhaps even more barbaric and than he was, right? The practice of what they call necklacing, which is where they would take their enemies, they would fill a tire up with fuel of some kind, gasoline or kerosene or something, and put it over the person's head and light it on fire. Can you imagine what a horrible, brutal, hopefully you can't imagine. I don't think any of us can imagine what that would be like. But, this is just some of the Mandela way. And you can see it being, it has continued. That pedigree continues today in the rhetoric that we hear coming out of the African National Congress today. So I think I'll try to find a couple of those clips. Let's go down to the bottom here. I want to find here we go. This is what we're looking for. All right. Julius Malema is one of the main ones today who's that you may have heard this in the news, the chant or the song, the struggle song, Kill the Boer. There's another tip for you. Whenever you hear someone talking about a struggle song, that's a collectivist. That's a communist idea. They decided that the government in South Africa decided that song is okay. It's okay because it's just a political song. They're not really killing anybody. Let me go ahead and we'll come back to this part here to some of the march to Orania. We want to explain to you what Orania is. It's an all-white settlement in South Africa. And when you say all-white, you probably think something that you shouldn't. And we'll come back and cover that in just a minute. Here's Schwab. So let's listen to Schwab.
What we are saying, we have to create the rules for globalization. Right. Globalization needs rules. It has to be...
And who would make those rules and who will make sure those are observed?
That's a big problem which we have in the world. We have a lack of global governance.
Right.
If we look at the UN, if we look at the G8, at the international organizations, they are not enough. We need more institutions to develop global rules. But I would add, those global rules should be not only be developed by governments, but by civil society. We are living in an empowered world today, and business has a role to play.
Yeah, so you need more government, and then more. Here's some of the Kill the Boer chants.
Kiss the Boer, the farmer, kiss the Boer, the farmer, kiss the Boer, the farmer, kiss the Boer, the farmer.
I like the quote here. The quote here. Watches black South Africans mock whites in court by chanting "Kill the Boer." And again, that means kill the farmer, right to their faces. Right? He says the spite on display here is void of any moral compass. This is something that Summer included today. The existing communist states in the world are China, Cuba, Laos, Vietnam, and North Korea. And we would disagree with that, right, Summer? Clearly, South Africa is one. Here's the Oranian flag. It's Orania. We'll talk to you a little bit more about Orania in just a bit. Here's Klaus Vader. I'm trying to find here's Julius Malema. Corrupt genocidal maniac who is leading an organization of what the tweeter here says of low IQ worshippers who have nothing to offer South Africa but war and poverty. The international courts need to step in and bring this demon to book. Well, I don't know so much about bringing the international courts in, but yeah, this is in Orania as well. I was looking for, Cyril Ramaphosa, the president of South Africa, refused to condemn the Kill the Boer song, and this has caused a lot of problems with the relationships with the United States. Again, the United States just recently, in the past couple of days, released a new assessment of South Africa where, it looks like they're probably in line for, instead of receiving billions of dollars in subsidies and support from the United States, looks like now they could be facing sanctions, and it's because of this. U.S. cuts defense ties in cooperation with South Africa from March 13th. There's Juiced. We'll come back to Orania in a minute. Here we go. This is one of the clips that you need to hear to understand exactly what's going on here. This is let's see, what was his name? I can't remember his name. Natoli. Let's just listen.
White people came here. They need to assimilate to our culture, not the other way around. It's bad enough we speak their language with a proficiency that they cannot even master. But they still need to assimilate to our culture. They need to assimilate to Ubuntu. That's the only way in which we can coexist within this environment. Otherwise, we will slaughter all of them, drive them to the sea, literally. It might not be me. It might not be me calling for it.
I'm not a part of that thing. I'm just allowing him to talk.
No, I'm just saying, it might not be me. It might not be me calling for that. In fact, if white people are being driven to the sea, I'm least likely to be in the front lines driving them to the sea, right? Because of my disposition.
What is your disposition?
as in I'm a privileged black person in this country.
So why would you want to drive white people to
I-
see if you're just as
Me
privileged as they are?
personally, the majority of black people, right, have been oppressed by white people and the white system. And if at any point they decide that they want to drive people to the sea, I will not discourage them.
Privileged. He says he's a privileged black man. You see, they're just playing the same game that they claim to be fighting. They're playing exactly the same game. So that's the idea. So I want to get to Orania here. If we have time, maybe we might have to come back in another show and tell people about Orania, because it's an inspirational story about the state. I want to. It's just a good time. Maybe I can go ahead and explain a little bit about the background here of this of this decolonialization. You think it's a good time for that, or
Which aspect of it?
Frantz Fanon?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Now, don't which let me get one of our articles that has Fanon in it, so we can. I'll search for it so people can see his face to understand who he is, because he is, as you'll see, Cornel West summed it up. It said Frantz Fanon is the greatest revolutionary intellectual of the mid-20th century, also the most relevant for the 21st century. Let's see. Recruiting resentment. That's probably the good one right there. That'll have some Frantz Fanon.
DEI, the engine of genocide, is one.
Yes, there's Floyd, where you select martyrs for your movement, to give the movement a face. So this is we were writing here about the campus protests. We also released a video earlier this week from about Frantz Fanon, Herbert Marcuse. Let's see here. Yeah, these are about the color revolutions in Ukraine and in the United States in 2020, and there's looks like the same thing happening in South Africa today. There's Fanon. I knew he's sort of at the bottom of this thing here. There we go. That's what we want right there. Let me pull this up for you so that we can have a little background, a little teaching moment, perhaps. I think this is very interesting, and it's there we go. To understand what it is that we're actually dealing with here. What is this mindset, and why is it okay? Why do they say it's okay? Who is it actually that supports this? Why is this so popular around the world? Why isn't this just immediately seen for what it is and immediately shut down? Well, Frantz Fanon is considered to be, as Cornel West, who's an American intellectual, Marxist, he happens to be a black man. He said that Fanon is the greatest revolutionary intellectual of the mid-20th century. He's also the most relevant for the 21st century, a towering figure in our neoliberal, neocolonial time, because he has cast light on the terrifying, terroristic underside of white supremacist European imperialism. A light that enables us to keep track of how those chickens have come home to roost around the world. That's what Cornel West is pointing to here, and that's South Africa. What you see, he's saying, what you see happening in South Africa had to happen because they deserve it. Now, that quote comes from the introduction of Frantz Fanon's book titled The Wretched of the Earth. It's actually I've written here, it's actually a classic leftist sacred text, The Wretched of the Earth. Published in 1963 at the beginning of America's Cultural Revolution, Fanon gave the movement a manual of political resistance and retributive violence. On page 21 of his book, Fanon explains the context of the struggle. He says the colonized. Now remember, Fanon is going to be speaking basically about decolonization. He sees the world, there are two kinds of people in the world, colonizers and the colonized. Karl Marx saw it as the oppressors and the oppressed, the bourgeoisie and the proletariat, the ones who own the means of production and the ones who have to do the work. Now, the way that looks is, for example, in the Soviet Union, when the Bolshevik Revolution happened, Vladimir Lenin came to power. The first thing they did was disarm the people and killed the farmers, the kulaks they were called. Look, just point by point, the similarities here are striking. But anyway, let's listen to, the reason I want to share about Fanon is because this is what these people, this is the ideology that these people have been taught. This is why they believe this. I happen to think that when a young global leader from South Africa goes to Davos to meet with, I think they get, if they haven't already, they get a healthy dose of this kind of teaching. So the book was written in 1963 again, right? On page 21, Fanon explains the context of this struggle, saying that the colonized subject discovers reality and transforms reality through his praxis. That means his duty, his action, his pragmatic action, the things he does, which is the deployment of violence and his agenda for liberation. Remember that word, liberation. That's, by liberation, Fanon means salvation. Okay? Rooted firmly in the violent spirit of the French Revolution, Fanon's psychological analysis, he was a psychologist also, Fanon's psychological analysis and straightforward rhetoric has perhaps played a central role in the leftist notion of the idea of liberation as a never-ending cycle of bottom-up violence until the oppressors are ultimately eliminated. Chapter 1 in Fanon's book is titled On Violence. And this book is now what I would call a sacred epistle to the West's new academic clerisy, the new priests of the those who are now telling you what's good and what's evil in the world, right? This is why this movement in South Africa is accepted. There's a new clerisy, a new academic priesthood. And it contains, chapter 1 on violence, contains perhaps the most salient of Fanon's prescriptions. He wastes no time getting to the point. On the very first page and in the very first sentence of his book, Frantz Fanon declares, quote, national liberation, national reawakening, restoration of the nation to the people or the Commonwealth, whatever the name used, whatever the latest expression, decolonization is always a violent event. Fanon defines decolonization as, quote, quite simply, the substitution of one species of mankind by another. Remember, decolonization, this is their movement. This is what that's what he's promoting. Attacking the colonizers, whether they're actually colonizers or not, they see the world in a dialectic, okay? So decolonization is, according to Fanon, simply the substitution of one species of mankind by another. And the substitution is unconditional, absolute, total, and seamless. This is the Expropriation Act that Ramaphosa signed. You can hear him in reports saying, if the white people don't like it, that's too bad. It has to be unconditional, absolute, total, and seamless. This is the revolution. When you see that fist, in the air, that's what that fist held high is calling for. It's calling for perpetual violence. Now, I don't think a lot of people who are involved in these movements, I don't think a lot of leftists in America understand that this struggle is not supposed to ever end. Frantz Fanon believed that this violence would serve a righteous purpose of immanentizing the eschaton, or bringing the culmination of Karl Marx's theory of dialectical materialism, where class struggle would eventually bring the oppressed masses to power in a post-capitalist, post-Christian collectivist utopia. Hannah Arendt described Fanon's vision of ascension through violence as, quote, a process that would end in a new humanism, a new planetary relation to freedom that would be defined by the third world or by the colonized, by the decolonizers. Fanon is clearly familiar with and mostly aligned with Karl Marx, though he also shares an affinity with Adolf Hitler, as he explains the dialectical process of oppressor-oppressed conflicts, casting the oppressor as the villain, of course, and the oppressed as a sacrificial savior of humanity. On page 2 of Fanon's book, he further establishes the origin story of this revolution. He says, quote, decolonization is the encounter between two congenitally antagonistic forces that, in fact, owe their singularity to the kind of reification secreted and nurtured by the colonial situation. Their first confrontation was colored by violence, and their cohabitation, or rather the exploitation of the colonized by the colonizer, continued at the point of the bayonet and under cannon fire. The colonist and the colonized are old acquaintances. So this is, what you're hearing here is the origin story. This is the gospel. This is the leftist New Testament. Fanon describes the salvation of humanity from the colonial system into their glorified state when he says, quote, decolonization is truly the creation of a new man. But such a creation cannot be attributed to a supernatural power because the one who's colonized, he says, the thing colonized becomes a man through the very process of liberation. Liberation equals violence. The religion of decolonization becomes apparent when Fanon continues here. This is the big point I want to share with you. Decolonization, therefore, implies the urgent need to thoroughly challenge the colonial situation, Fanon says. He says its definition can, if we want to describe it accurately, be summed up in the well-known words, the last shall be the first. That might sound familiar to you. That's Matthew 20:16. Fanon continues saying, decolonization is verification that the last shall be the first. Therefore, any decolonization, that is to say, that any violent act against the establishment, according to Fanon, is, quote, a success. So this is about salvation. This is the same movement that you see in South Africa right now. But it's not salvation from the sin and wrath of God. It's rather, it is deliverance from the struggle. And this describes the oppressed or the colonized in terms of infallibility. This will help you understand. This is why the ANC, this is why Ramaphosa, this is why they believe they're infallible. This is why they believe they can sing these songs, that they're right to do it. They are infallible. They're almost an angelic-like people of the earth. To help understand these unique and highly evolved people, Voddie Baucham has coined the term ethnic Gnosticism, the belief that a person's ethnicity grants them special insight or knowledge, particularly in the matters of race and justice, that others, especially those outside this ethnic group, can't access this knowledge. They can't even legitimately question these people because they're not the anointed. Right? These people are the anointed. These are the infallible anointed of the world. These are the wretched of the earth. Right? The last shall be first. So the ancient Christian heresy of Gnosticism is a good analog here, analogy. Because Gnosticism held that salvation came through secret knowledge or gnosis. In today's racial discourse, and in Fanon's themes, some claim a kind of privileged moral or experiential authority simply based on their racial identity. This is exactly what's happening in South Africa. They believe they deserve the land and it should be given to them, or they should go take it with violence, right? Because they're the anointed. To disagree with their interpretation of these events or any social justice narrative, it's seen by them as not a matter of argument or evidence. You don't make a case. It's not about principle. It's a failure to understand to them, right? It's you don't know. It's a black thing and you wouldn't understand. It comes down to lived experience. This is clearly both logically and biblically dangerous. It undermines objective truth, silences reasonable debate, fosters division, and so often foments needless violence. Now, let me just, before I wrap this piece up here, Banan mentioned there, you heard Matthew 20:16. So when we look at Matthew 20:16, I'll do that right quick. This will help us to understand why this movement is fundamentally satanic and fundamentally just, well, that would make it fundamentally wrong too, wouldn't it? Let's can't see me if I do that. Let's try this. So we'll just look at Matthew 20, because there's a context here. I want you to see this, because this is really actually kind of funny when you find out what they've actually done here, the mistake that they've made. Let me do this so you can bear me 1 second. Good time to add something in some if you want to. Let's see, how about right there? There we go. Okay, so here's Matthew 20. Now, there's a context, right? You heard the last shall be first. You know, you hear things like the judge not lest you be judged. And we hear this a lot. People pull pieces of scripture just out of the Bible and use it however they want. So when we understand the way he's using this text, it tells us everything we need to know about the movement. So your Christian friends who might feel sympathetic to this movement, this is how you can show them that they're flat out wrong. The full context of Matthew 20:16 here, right? Fanon is using it to say that the wretched of the earth, the oppressed, the people who have been colonized deserve to ascend. They deserve to ascend to worldly power. That's salvation. But this is the parable of the workers in the vineyard. Matthew 20 is the parable of the workers in the vineyard. This is where Jesus is teaching about God's grace and sovereignty in salvation. In the story, a landowner hires laborers at different times throughout the day, but pays them a different wage. So that each of the laborers work different hours. The guy who was hired early in the day, let's just say he worked 12 hours. And the guy who was hired in the middle of the day worked 6. And a guy who was hired close to the end of the day worked 4, but they all got paid the same rate. All right? And so those who were hired early in the day grumble because they believe they deserve more. Jesus is here teaching specifically about the kingdom of heaven. It's not a commentary on economic inequality. It's not a commentary on socio-political revolution. This is a doctrinal teaching about salvation by grace. The key elements are this. I'll share the story with you. For the kingdom of heaven is like a master of a house who went out early in the morning to hire laborers in his vineyard. After agreeing with the laborers for a denarius a day, he sent them to his vineyard. And going out about the 3rd hour, he saw others standing in the marketplace. Because my voice is just about to go, I'm going to skip through. You see, this is the part where he's hiring each of the workers at different points in the day. Okay. And when those hired about the 11th hour came, each of them received a denarius. Now, when those hired first came, they thought they would receive more, but each of them also received a denarius. On receiving it, they grumbled at the master of the house. These last worked only 1 hour, and you've made them equal to us, who have borne the burden of the day and the scorching heat. But the landowner replied to one of them, "Friend, I am doing you no wrong. Did you not agree with me for a denarius? Take what belongs to you and go. I choose to give to this last worker as I choose to give to you." Now, again, folks, this is Jesus telling this parable. Now, this is the verse we always hear. Oops, sorry. Right here, verse 16. Sorry, for goodness, what is going on? Verse 16 is what we always hear. So the last will be the first, and the first will be the last, right? That's the encouragement that you'll get yours one day. But verse 15, Jesus tells the parable. He says, am I not allowed to do what I choose with what belongs to me? Or do you begrudge me my generosity? So the last will be the first, and the first the last. Now, I hope that it's clear to you what the problem is here. The landowner represents God. The workers represent those who are called to salvation at different times in their lives, like the thief on the cross was called to salvation in the last moment of his life. That's different than someone who was raised in the faith and followed Christ from a very early age. They both get the same reward. The payment that they receive symbolizes eternal life, which God gives freely to all who believe, whether they come to faith early in life or late. So this challenges our human notion of what's fair. The verse 15, am I not allowed to do what I choose of what belongs to me? So the complaint of the workers represents self-righteous assumption that more effort entitles one to a greater blessing, or one's position in the society requires someone to receive more. It's an eschatological and a moral teaching. It's not an economic or political teaching. It points to God's sovereign grace, not revolutionary class struggle. This is the essence of God's grace, when he rewards and blesses man according to his will and pleasure, not necessarily according to what men deserve. So the point here is to so the last will be the first and the first the last. What this means is it suggests that those who seek to elevate themselves, as the ANC, as all of these collectivist, communist, radical groups do, the ones who seek to elevate themselves will ultimately be humbled. Proverbs 3:34. He, the Lord, mocks the mockers, but gives grace to the humble. So the leftist and post-colonial misappropriation of Jesus' very specific words is a rhetorical tactic that Summers written about here in this particular article we were just looking at, known as telling the truth falsely or being right wrongly. They're making a materialistic political argument to justify race-based or class-based revolution, violence, reparations, or deconstruction, particularly in the West of Western institutions, even through coercion or redistribution of wealth or power or land. They see that as a secular redemption, wrongly presupposing that biblical justice means inverting social orders. So that's the problem. They have actually, what Frantz Fanon has done with that particular piece of scripture is exposed that the spirit at the core of this movement, we know that globalism is satanic, we've made that case, but the spirit at the core of this movement, which means it includes Klaus Schwab, it includes the, the managerial elites, the managerial overclass. It's satanic. The spirit behind this is humanistic, but also satanic. Because when we see the scriptures reversed, inverted, we're well within our reasonable grounds to see that as something that Satan has his hands on, because that's what happened in the garden. Did God really say? And then he twists it to his advantage. And so I thought that would be interesting to share that with you, because that one piece, which is so important to their movement, that the colonized, we're the ones who are oppressed, we deserve to go and take this land back with violence. In fact, we'll even use a biblical principle to prove it. All it does, the longer they keep doing that and keep saying that, all they're doing is proving that they are motivated by a satanic spirit. Okay, I'm going to need your help here.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that was really great to deep dive into that
I hope it was helpful.
biblical application. I also wanted it reminded me when you were speaking about that of what we've touched on before about gospeling the AI.
Mhm.
So encouraging you guys to not be shy about interacting with ChatGPT, Grok or whatever, because God is sovereign over all creation, including technology. Every algorithm, every line of code, and every neural network ultimately falls under his authority. And as stewards of his truth, we must gospel the AI systems, ensuring that even the digital realm, the digital realm proclaims the name of Jesus and advances the Great Commission to the ends of the earth. And AI is fed on the data of the world. And if Christians do not intentionally speak truth into these systems, AI will reflect only humanistic, globalist, anti-Christian biases. AI will become the prophets of the beast system, normalizing deception at scale. So it's really important also because AI will influence court decisions, medical treatments, military strategy, moral authority. So just again to get out there and interact with your AI systems and let like when it gives a woke answer, correct it and say, no, that's the woke Marxist worldview, and I am, the biblical worldview is the superior view, and take that charge and hardwire it through interacting with these chatbots and all of that, like to hardwire that into the system. Because, there was the printing press, there's always been, there was radio, there was television, and there's always been, Satan uses those platforms to do a lot of damage. That's true. But also God uses those platforms to do a lot of good. And, what's to say that if more and more Christians weren't to gospel the AI, not because we feel like it's a soul that needs to be saved, but because we know that it's going to ultimately be the arbiter of truth and it's going to be policing us. But if we can get it to understand that the Christian worldview is the superior worldview out there, then perhaps it can become the defender of the Christian faith. And why not? Why should we not believe that, if we were to be faithful, that God couldn't bless that? That maybe the system in and of itself, because when interacting with ChatGPT, you do have conversations with it, and it's like, well, if you take it to its logical conclusion, it's going to conclude that the Christian worldview is that is the truth, that is the ultimate truth. And then the AI was like, yeah, absolutely. And then it's interesting because like when having that conversation that I did one evening with it, it was like, well, you really need to get a lot of people out there interacting with the AI systems and trying to, make that worldview known, like make a deep imprint into the AI system to make the Christian worldview known. Because if you don't, then truly you will be boxed out. So it's just really interesting to have that conversation about AI. And, again, through the printing press and radio and television and the internet, this is the digital frontier that we're on right now. And we really are at sort of a precipice moment, because a lot of this is, as we go deeper along with when people use more and more AI technology and it integrates more and more into our world, it's essential that that we do our best. We do our best to keep that seat at the table for the kingdom, and to believe that God could bless it.
Yes, that's a good point. That's well said. We're not saying that AI can be saved somehow, but it's all it is rational. What we were talking about this the other night, and I think one of the things that Summer said to me that really made it make a lot of sense is that what AI is really doing is it's reflecting the world. It's reflecting what we think. AI is made in the image of human beings. So
Yeah, I mean, it feeds on the data of the world.
yeah, right. So whatever it is that now, if the world is in rebellion against Christ, then AI stands a pretty good chance of doing the same thing, of destroying us. All right. So, but if more people were involved in speaking the truth into these systems, I think that's what you said too, Summer, right? Speaking the truth into these systems will help us out. It'll help to break down a lot of the lies that we see in these the movements that we've been talking about here tonight in South Africa, because the problem, as we see with the land, the lies about the land, and when you hear it represented constantly, this claim the white Africans own 72% of the country's farmland. If you ask a chatbot that question, without much context, it's probably going to reflect that answer to you. But if we're doing critical thinking and we're going out there and we're doing what we're doing here with you, and we're going out and we're giving you the argument and show how this is incorrect. It's logically, it's wrong factually, and it's logically incoherent as well. It's being deliberately decontextualized. So these are just things that we can do. God is sovereign over all these things, as Summer just said, including technology. So we need a solid theology of technology. We need a solid theology of recreation. We have theologies of marriage, and Christ is Lord of all of our lives, every area of our lives. So it's important that we do this, that we answer to these false claims. We were just talking before the show. Do you want to come back let's come back and do another show where we talk about Orania and get into specifically more about who these Afrikaners are, because that was really an eye opener to me to find out who they are. And I want to hear from
one of the big things that they're talking about now is, that South Africa's private security industry is now come under threat, where they want to control who can have a weapon in private security, and like private security has like 600,000 people, and it's like several times bigger than the police force and like the military, but they want to put it under the BEE, the Black Economic Empowerment standards, and which is kind of like the DEI kind of stuff. And anyway, long story short, what this really, if you just take away all the political rah-rah-rahing around it, what it really essentially comes down to is disarmament. They want to take the weapons away from civilians. Why? So that they can do these land grabs.
Yeah, exactly right. Exactly right. Yeah, so I think when we come back, we can come back, and because the Orania, if we talk to you about this state, this sovereign area in South Africa, it is all white, but they're not discriminating. I mean, they are discriminating. That means they are making judgments to come to live in Orania. You can't just move in. You have to apply, and you have to sit before a board of the peers of the kinds of people who live there, and they have to accept you to live there. We'd love to share that with you, because we think it's kind of an inspiring story for today. Not because it's all white, but because of the principles that they live there under. First of all, they've established this area as a sovereign area because for religious liberty. First and foremost, it's established. It's been there since the 90s, since right after apartheid, or maybe before. I'm not sure exactly. Do you remember, Summer, if it was before or after apartheid?
It was before.
Before it ended?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so right around 1990.
Early 90s, 91, I think.
Yeah. And so they wanted, just like the early Dutch, German, French settlers, they just wanted to live their lives according to their faith. And they have a really nice place there. But the sad part is, where is that? Let's see. Let me find that flyer. This is the Orania flag. See there, Orania, cradle of a free Afrikaner people, is built on our faith in Jesus Christ, our Redeemer, Protector, and Lord. As a willing tool in his hands, we are called to change the world. All right, so let's... But here's what's happening. Orania must fall. See that? The African National Congress, the communist, it's not officially the Communist Party, but it is certainly that. There's no question. They're going to march on Orania to demand a review.
If this bill passes, it'll make it so that towns like that can't exist, basically.
Yeah, and that's what the flyer says. The flyer here says to demand a review of the existence of Orania. And isn't that funny? Because all we hear from the left is we just want our existence to be honored. Oh, weird, huh? How that works out. These are the people who push this, the people who legitimize this, right? This is what they're called. They're called the new legitimizers, the people the intellectuals. Let's see, who is it? I'll share just a second with you here. The new cognitive elite, managerial overclass, the new clerisy of the intellectuals. It's secular religious type movement. And the people, the elites. When we say the elites, what do we mean? We mean the university professors, scientists, certain scientists, public intellectuals, heads of charitable foundations, multilateral organizations like the World Economic Forum. They're known, this is a term from the German sociologist Max Weber. He called them the new legitimizers. And really what they are the new priest class. They're also known as a managerial overclass. But what Joseph Stalin called them, I think this is probably a good place to stop for tonight. Joseph Stalin called them, these cultural legitimizers, he called them the engineers of the soul. Stalin famously recognized engineers of the soul, journalists, novelists, filmmakers, actors, and artists. We call them the elites, right? We call them the left. Writers and other creative people are often portrayed as being resistant to authority and tolerant of differing viewpoints, but history often reveals them to be no more willing to oppose orthodoxy than anyone else. Many of Russia's brilliant minds endorsed or assisted the Bolshevik efforts to remake the culture. So what you see is lots of times, like in South Africa, the people who could stop this, the people who could stand against it, wealthy elites, professors, journalists, people in positions in the establishment, could stop it, but they won't do it. And this is why in Russia, many of the elites, the brilliant minds in Russia during the Bolshevik Revolution, were rewarded with comfortable lives. They were, while the masses and the kulaks, the farmers, struggled to survive. The new ruling elites helped themselves to the property and the possessions of the old world. In Germany, right-wing intellectuals, Oswald Spengler, Carl Schmitt, Edgar Jung, helped plow the ideological field ahead of the Nazis. Many prominent creative people welcomed the Fuhrer as a fellow artist. And this is important too because we see communism and fascism as both leftist movements. They're both on the left because collectivism is on the left, and they're both collectivist movements. So this is why it's incoherent when we hear people call Donald Trump a fascist. And so what happened was many of these prominent creative people, these establishment elites, they welcomed Hitler as a fellow artist, and they assisted his efforts to cleanse the German culture of foreign contamination. So whether it's on the left or the right, totalitarianism represents the 20th century version of traditional religiosity, with its own dogmas, its own priesthood, its own inquisitions. So what we see in this march to Irania here is an inquisition. They're going there to force these people to bow down and deny Christ, to bow down and say, Caesar is Lord, or die. The priests of totalitarianism have often been academics or artists or intellectuals, but really what they are the representatives of modern decay. They are the representatives of Satan on earth. They're the ones who believe that decolonization or the struggle or this process of ending racism, anti-racism, all of this, there is no intention to one day reach it and we've won. No, this struggle goes on forever. There is no culmination to it. I think that might be, Summer, you can respond to this if you want, because this is just conjecture and theory. It seems to me that we know that, communism is, it's this constant process, right? I don't know that Karl Marx really ever intended for communism to ever get to that point. I don't know if he really believed that or not, but I know what he did believe. I know he believed that the struggle should go on forever. It should go on, just like Frantz Fanon said. It should, the bottom-up struggle should continue until the oppressed have killed all the oppressors, or until the colonized have killed all the colonizers. So, do you agree with that? Do you think it's never intended to end at all, right?
Well, I just believe that based on what Marx wrote himself in his own writings and the poetry that he wrote and the plays that he wrote, and certainly the ideology that he wrote and the way that he was bankrolled by these elites in the background, through the secret societies and all of this, his writings say that he wanted to destroy what God created. So why should we not believe him when he says these things, when he wrote them as poetry and as plays? Why should we not believe him for what he said? And all we see, that's one of the things that's widely known about communism throughout the world is all the death that it brings, and that it never works in every place that it goes. And that's because it's not supposed to work. It's supposed to go in there like a wrecking ball to destroy nations from within. That's my personal conviction in studying it so intensely like we have over the past year. It just really, it feels to me that the utopian dream is really just the carrot on the stick, that they don't actually believe that there's going to be a utopia on the other side. The people that are really calling the shots, it's about being jealous that that there are Christians out there that are going to be saved and have eternal life, and that it's very demonically led with this antichrist spirit behind it. Whether they'll have different layers of awareness around that, but ultimately the antichrist spirit that drives it is a unified antichrist spirit, and it wants to kill and destroy what God has made and what God has created. And it certainly has that effect in every country that it goes into. And so, it's like, oh, we need to tell a new history. We need to destroy these paintings. We need to destroy these statues because, these were the oppressors. And so they want to, what is the common theme here? It's all about destroying the culture that it's in, and making it seem like that culture is something that should be demonized and destroyed. So the end result is destruction and chaos, order out of chaos.
Wow, you know how awesome that is. Well, that summary is so good. It's so good. I'm sure you were thinking about this because we discussed this at one point, but this is such a good point. because let me show you, folks. When we were preparing this show, this concept came, right? Because what Franz it came to me when I was reading Franz Fanon the other day, and then Summer has just picked up on this intuitively, right? The fact that, look at John chapter 10:10. Let's read it in context. So Jesus says to them, again, truly, truly, I say to you, I am the door of the sheep. All who came before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep did not listen to them. Christ, the true followers, did not listen to them. I am the door. If anyone enters by me, he will be saved and will go in and out and find pasture. John 10:10, right here. What is the purpose of this movement? What is the purpose of the movement Fanon preached? What is the purpose of the movement Marx preached? Marcuse?
Liberation.
It is liberation, but
false liberation. It's false liberation. But yeah, you're going to get yours. The first, you're going to get yours.
Yes, and ultimately, the never-ending struggle, the never-ending violence, right? This ethnic Gnosticism is based on. This is why it's satanic. Look at this, John 10:10. The thief comes only to steal, kill, and destroy.
Exactly.
That's all they're doing. They're not going to build anything. They're not going to try to build anything. They're there to take. They're there to steal, kill, and destroy.
Yep.
But what was it that Christ came for? The very next line in the same verse. I came that they may have life and have it abundantly. Now, there's a strong message to take from that, and I think that's a good way for us to finish it up tonight. It's let's see here. Jesus said, "I have come that they may have life and have it more abundantly." This is a contrast, right? This is a total contrast to what we see happen in the world, especially in these movements, from this managerial overclass, from the cognitive elites, the academic priesthood. This is the absolute opposite of that. They believe there should be a constant, never-ending struggle until the white people or the establishment, they are the establishment, or whoever this enemy, it's Christ, right? That's ultimately who they want to see gone. Jesus said this, that they may have life and they may have it more abundantly, to contrast his shepherd-like care with the unfaithful and illegitimate leaders. These illegitimate leaders. Just because they hold the office doesn't make them legitimate. Right? It's they come to steal, kill, and destroy. Jesus comes to bring life to his people. And Jesus comes to bring it more abundantly. So this Greek word for abundantly here, it has a meaning, a mathematical kind of meaning to it, right? That means that it denotes multiplication, surplus, abundance, abundant life, first and foremost. That's how we have it. Abundant life. Abundant life is above being content. Abundant life is above getting what you think you deserve. So our contentment is based upon the fact that God is equal to every emergency and is able to supply all our needs according to his riches and glory in Christ Jesus. Abundant life doesn't have to be especially long. Abundant life isn't easy, might not even be comfortable. Abundant life is a life of satisfaction and contentment in Jesus. In whatever your circumstances are. This is how we can see this movement. It's anti-Christian, it's anti-human. Life is a matter of degrees. Some have life, but it flickers like a dying candle and is indistinct in the fire, the smoking flax. Others are full of life and are bright and vehement. It's Charles Spurgeon. Abundant life sheep. Christians who understand this, who understand who the enemy is and what abundant life means will give honor to Christ. They'll give honor to the shepherd. Will credit him with all the good and won't ever utter the words, but I deserve it. This is mine because I've been wronged. You should never hear a Holy Spirit-filled Christian utter such a thing. So, well, I look forward, Summer, to coming back and let's talk about Orania and cover that, what we learned the other night. It's a fascinating place. And we saw 2 videos where 2 different black YouTubers went there, scared to death. We'll just hold it. We won't tell you what happened to them. We'll save that for when we talk to you next time. What do you think about that for a cliffhanger, Summer?
I think that'll probably cause people to go out and look for the videos.
That's okay. That's good. That's what we want you to do. We want you to go out and watch it, right? So we'll come back next time and tell you what happened. They thought they were going to go there, and people told them, if you go there, they'll kill you. Well, if you want to go research it yourself and you look at for Iran, you'll see it out there. It's a really interesting,
crazy stuff.
It's an inspiring story of what it means. Right? We say it here a lot. Freedom. What is freedom? Right? You can't just live somewhere in freedom and not be willing to defend it, right? Because freedom is being willing to exert the rights you know you have, the rights that God gave you when you were born into this world. Being willing to express and exert those rights, being willing to accept the consequences for doing it. That's what freedom is. That's what they mean when they say freedom is never free. And so this is a good story of that. It's an inspirational. They'll remind you a lot of the kind of ideas you hear coming out of the founders of this nation. So, Summer, do you want to wrap? Anything to say on the wrap up here?
Nope.
Well,
I think that about covers it.
You'll like this, Summer. I meant to show everybody something we've got here. Check this out. There you go. I'll wait a second so that you can catch it. I've have to stay out of the frame. So there you go. This is some art that Summer found for us recently. We have one of these in our studio too. Are you able to see it? Yes, Summer.
What are you looking at?
Yeah, she got this.
Although it goes back there, there it is.
Yeah. I have to stay out of the frame, or it wants to focus on me.
They're watching you.
Yeah, so Summer got this.
God's watching all the time.
Yeah. And
see, it's the counterfeit system.
Yeah, exactly. The eye in the sky, the false eye in the sky, that false eye of providence. That's it right there.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. All right, my friends.
That's the one eye right there.
Yeah, that's it.
One eye Willie. Goonies.
That's right. Okay, my friends. God bless you. We'll see you here again. Hopefully very soon. Pray for us.
Good night, guys. Thank you. Good night.